Welcome to the Wonder Cinema Podcast,
where we wonder about cinema.
I'm filmmaker and film critic Brian Henry Martin.
And I'm cinema historian and author Dr. Sam Manning.
Welcome to Series 2, where we'll be wondering about the remarkable story of home video in Northern Ireland.
The rise and fall of videotape, from format wars to video nasties, piracy, paramilitaries, and the wonder of the video shop.
So we want you to
say yes to VHS.
Welcome to episode 3, Eject. On this episode, Sam, we're going to be talking about the video nasty and the moral panic controversy of the early 1980s. So, Sam, how did this all come about?
Well, we've spoken in previous episodes about the video boom of the late 1970s and 1980s. And almost as soon as people start getting VCRs, there's a real interest in horror films for a number of reasons. Firstly, the big companies are often reluctant to release new films on video, so there's a gap there for smaller distributors to bring out these horror films. Most of them weren't granted a BBFC certificate to be shown in the cinema, but they can be shown on video because it's a bit of a wild west out there. There isn't really any legislation on what can or can't be shown or sold on video.
I mean, that was the attraction of video. You see, to someone like me, Sam, I was a teenager at the time. I could watch films that I could never dream of seeing in the cinema. And there were many of my favourite films. You know, I'm talking about things like, say, Midnight Cowboy or Clute, or, you know, films that would have had maybe 18 or X certificate. I would never have been able to see, but I saw them on video. So this idea, Sam, that video had no classification at this time?
Yeah, so in the cinema, films would be granted a BBFC, British Board of Film Censors certificate, which in 1984 changed its name to the British Board of Film Classification. Films would be granted a certificate. As we understand it today, an 18 film could only be seen if you were 18 or older. Video, like I said, was a real Wild West. You could go into a video shop and theoretically you could get anything over the counter.
You could get anything over the counter, and sometimes under the counter, and sometimes behind the counter, because that's where these films were lurking. But Sam, we're talking about films with notorious titles that were beyond horror films. I mean, these weren't your run-of-the-mill horror films. These were slasher films. They were schlock horror. They were Nazis, cannibals, killer nuns. I mean, what kind of films are we talking about here?
Yes, so things like Cannibal Holocaust, The Driller Killer, I Spit on Your Grave, SS Experiment Camp, some of which were definitely of dubious quality. But in their marketing, they really leaned into the fact that they were horrific. They had very sensational covers, which gained attention, and people watched the video based on the cover. But that also meant that they gained the attention of people who wanted to control what people were watching, and were concerned that we were becoming too much of a permissive society, that these videos would deprave and corrupt the youth of society.
Now, when did this become an issue in Northern Ireland? When did we wake up to the idea of video nasties?
So it kind of followed on from what happened in the rest of the UK. So films could be prosecuted under the 1959 Obscene Publications Act, which I won't go too much into the details of, but some of these films were felt to fall foul of the act. There were test cases in London where people seized videos from video shop owners, didn't allow them to sell them anymore, took it to court, and then a jury would find if they fell foul of the Obscene Publications Act or not. The first mention that I can find of a video nasty in Northern Ireland is from the Belfast News-Letter in September 1982, and they report on one of these cases in London where copies of Death Trap and The Driller Killer were seized from a video shop, and that was taken to court. Shortly afterwards, there was a report, this is in September 1982, in the Lurgan Mail, which reported on banned videos for sale in the town. They said that copies of Driller Killer and Death Trap were on display in most town centre video shops, along with others which had been identified by the Director of Public Prosecutions as being, as potentially falling foul of the Act. One owner said that interest had increased since publicity about the videos. So, in publicising the fact that these videos were on sale in London, had therefore potentially increased interest in Northern Ireland. And one of the things this article also points out is that video shop owners have had no guidance on what to do. And in fact, the law was slightly different in Northern Ireland. The 1959 Obscene Publications Act didn't apply. Here, we only had an Obscene Publications Act from 1857, which wasn't really fit for purpose. So even if police had wanted to prosecute people in Northern Ireland, they couldn't really. But it all got swept up in this moral panic, this knee-jerk reaction from conservative moralists that the content of these videos was going to deprave people within our society.
Yeah, moral panic was the order of the day. There was moral panics about everything, about communism, homosexuality, feminism. So video just became part of that cocktail. And into all of this, Sam, as we know from the last episode, is pirate copies and counterfeit copies and video nasties. And, it is the Wild West, it feels, for the video market. I was very aware of some of the films on this list. They were notorious, even for me as a teenager. Like The Driller Killer. What a brilliant title. I hadn't seen that film at the time, but I was aware, and I was scared of drills ever since.
I think understandably so, Brian.
The Evil Dead, directed by Sam Raimi, who would later direct that other video nasty, Spider-Man. But I certainly saw The Evil Dead at this time. And what struck me about it, obviously I was terrified, but what struck me about it was the movement of the camera was extraordinary in this film. And that's what I remember. But Sam, the most notorious of all the video nasties was I Spit on Your Grave. The title alone shook us in the school playground. The idea of spitting on someone's grave was probably the most outrageous thing you could do. But yet, Sam, we never saw this film, but we knew the title. Now, Sam, am I right in saying that Evil Dead, Driller Killer, and maybe even I Spit on Your Grave, did they ever get released?
Yes, they were all subsequently released, Brian. I think it took a while for I Spit on Your Grave to get a DVD release, heavily edited in the 21st century.
Now, these three films were obviously part of the video nasty list, the 72 films that were banned. Who put this list together, Sam?
So this was the Director of Public Prosecutions, put together a list of 72 films in 1983 that he felt would fall foul of the Obscene Publications Act if they hadn't already. And in many ways, if you're a horror fan, this is a list of the films that you need to see. And it was, doing the direct opposite of what its intention was in the first place.
And my experience of video libraries at the time was as long as you had your membership card, you could go in and ask for any title, no matter what your age was, because you could say, it's for my dad. Have you got Driller Killer? My dad wants to see it. I'm just transporting it home, 9 times out of 10, you would be given that tape, which seems incredible now.
Yeah, and legally there was no reason for video shop owners not to give you that tape if you requested it, even for yourself.
Now, these 72 films that we're talking about that were video nasties, they weren't on the shelves necessarily. There was always the play in video shops that behind the counter or behind the door at the back, there's other videos that you can get, and you have to be in the know to get those videos. And certainly in my experience, pirate videos, sometimes counterfeit videos, certainly video nasties would not be in a legitimate box with that video. Sometimes they'd be Trojan videos. They'd be hiding in other boxes, Sam. So it's amazing to think that in video shops, video libraries across Northern Ireland and across the rest of the UK, there was no classification on any videotape until 1984.
Yeah, that's right, when the Video Recordings Act came in and introduced mandatory certification for videos for the first time.
Of course, the irony of all of this is, the Video Nasty title was coined by Mary Whitehouse. She came up with this. Mary Whitehouse was a major figure at the time, Christian conservative campaigner. The National Viewers and Listeners Association terrorized television, making phone calls after every program to say, ban it, cut it. But Sam, from your point of view, looking back on this, how big a figure was Mary Whitehouse in all of this?
Well, she was kind of everywhere, including Northern Ireland. So in the last episode, we spoke of a episode of Counterpoint on video piracy. And as you said, these issues of piracy and censorship are very much interconnected. And in fact, Mary Whitehouse appears on the episode of Counterpoint. She's interviewed outside of City Hall and asked about her opinions on video nasties. She talks about the fact that none of us in society really know the impact of these videos and what impact they might have. And that is something that can only be really judged years later. But she does believe that people have already become desensitized to the material, and she welcomes the legislation that is soon to go through the House of Commons. But I think what's really interesting in that interview is that it doesn't really talk about Northern Ireland at all. It's very general. That interview could take place almost anywhere in the UK and be the same. And you think, why aren't they talking about this within the context of the Troubles when there is real horror going on outside?
Yeah, I mean, that is the elephant in the room, quite literally, as Alan Clark, famously coined it in his film. Because when you think of the violence that was happening and the violence that young people at that time were exposed to, and that acceptable level of violence that became just part of normality, murder, bombing, shooting, just became a normal part of everyday life. You just kind of feel how bizarre is the fact that video nasty, that people are worried about videos and not worried about what the horror that's actually happening outside your house.
Yeah, definitely. And other, important figures in Northern Ireland become involved, or I would say dragged into this debate and jump on the bandwagon of the video nasties. So, for instance, the 1983 Belfast Presbyterian Synod, they called for legislation to control the sale of video nasties.
And I think, Sam, this all happens because of the video boom. And it all happens so quickly. We talked in previous episode about it being a gold rush, and it really was. I mean, you went from, a few tapes to like 3,000 titles a month being released into the Northern Ireland market. I mean, who could just keep up with that? I mean, it was a flood.
Yeah, and as you say, they were easily available. So, for instance, there were reports that a film called Snuff could be rented for $150 a night from Ballymena. So that's the same price as any other video as well. And I think a lot of the dealers themselves didn't really know what they were dealing with. They just had a library of, let's say, 500, 1,000 tapes, and they were just renting out to people if they wanted them. It's not as if they had a detailed knowledge of every video that they stocked in their store.
And if people in Northern Ireland had become desensitized to violence, well, no shit, Sherlock. We're living in the Troubles, and we had become desensitized to violence. So, and the terrible thing about this is the shock value of video nasties. Every time, the bar had to be lowered so that the shock was greater, because the audience wanted, they wanted to be shocked more and more.
Yeah, and I would argue in hindsight, a lot of the reporting about video nasties was at the least disingenuous. And there were lots of reports that conflated watching these videos with crimes, with occult activities. There were all kinds of sensationalized reports in the tabloid media that really whipped up this moral panic. There were lots of surveys that were carried out with, I would say, questionable methodology that made ridiculous claims about the extent and the impact of video nasties in society.
But the landscape would change in 1984 with the Video Recordings Act. Now, Sam, what impact would this have? How would this change the video landscape?
Well, Brian, it had a really big impact. The first important thing to note is that the Act applied to Northern Ireland, unlike the latest version of the Obscene Publications Act. And it meant that all films needed to receive a BBFC certificate, which had to be clearly marked on the video. So that's something like a U, a PG, a 15 or an 18. 12 certificate only came in later in the 1980s. And it meant that video shops had to get new copies of videos that included the BBFC certificate, and they had a few years to do this. There was a bit of a transition period, but it was still quite a task for video shops to get new copies of videos with the certificate.
I was unaware, Sam, I think that one of the consequences of the Video Recordings Act was not just that films would be given classification, but they would be cut. A film that you would see in the cinema, when you came to watch it later on video, there were cuts made to that same film.
Yeah, so it definitely controlled what could be shown on video. For instance, in the last episode, we talked about that top 10 list from November 1982. And there's a film like The Burning, which hadn't received a cinema release in Northern Ireland, had then been released uncut. Reports suggest accidentally by Thorn EMI. Then would probably have to be re-released in a revised version after the Video Recordings Act.
And the challenge with any kind of censorship is it's very subjective. And so a film likely to deprave or corrupt the viewer. I mean, for me, Sam, there are many titles that fall under that banner, but they wouldn't be on the 72 nasty list. But I mean, what's your sense of that, Sam, of how subjective censorship is?
It's incredibly subjective. And I think the thing for me looking back is, I'm not saying there shouldn't have been any legislation. It's obviously important to control what children might be viewing, especially in the home. But I think the legislation that was passed was done so on the back of disingenuous arguments, often by bad faith actors. It was whipped up by this whole moral panic, and it wasn't evidence-led, and the evidence that there was very flimsy in a lot of cases.
Now, even after the Video Recordings Act, the moral panic, though, continued, Sam, and, there were still reports of what videos were doing to corrupt the youth.
Yeah, like we said before, this moral panic very much spreads to Northern Ireland very quickly. And there's one particular article of interest, which is a survey which was published in 1984 by the Belfast News-Letter. What they did was they interviewed 350 children, 11 to 14-year-olds, in schools from across different parts of Belfast, and asked them what they thought about video nasties and what kind of things they watched at the time.
I was this age when this survey came out, and if somebody had approached me as a kid and said, "Have you watched a video nasty?" I would have said yes, even if I had or I hadn't, because I would have just been mischievous at the time, and I would have wanted to shock, and I would have said, I spit on your grave every day when I come home from school.
I think the first question as well, what do you regard as a video nasty? You're basically just asking children to provide their own definitions and then ask them if they've watched it. They are bound to say they have watched a video nasty.
And also, they're asking, where did you watch the video? So you're going to tout on your older brother or sister, and then do you know where the video came from? That's a very sinister question to get some video shop owner into hot water. The headline, Sam, is 8 out of 10 Belfast children watch video nasties. I mean, that's a really inflammatory headline.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is very much in the mould of other surveys that were completed across the UK. It is, if I was being cynical, which I suppose I am, I would say it is more designed to fan the flames of moral panic rather than to be critical and to look at it objectively.
You know, and the findings provide an alarming pattern as to the viewing habits of young people. They quote what they have seen, and one of the young people says, blood, guts and gore, with madmen running around with axes. Now, growing up in certain parts of Belfast, that was a nightly occurrence on the streets, honestly, let alone on video nasties. But it just goes to show you the video panic that was happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And that point about asking children to identify what they thought was a video nasty. So the responses include a film that shows nothing but people having horrible deaths. Another child says a film which is a total blurb of bad language, blood and sex. And another says a blue movie. So there's a real variety of what people consider to be video nasties. You know, it's not an actual thing. It just becomes this kind of catch-all term where anything that is seen as slightly taboo comes under.
Now, if there's a sadness around all of this, Sam, it's the fact that video had become associated with nastiness and seediness, and that in a way is a shame. But not all video libraries were operating like that.
You get a number of shops that really emphasise the fact that they are dealing in films for family entertainment. So, for instance, in 1983, there's an advertising feature for Video World in Portadown, which calls itself the video shop that will put you in the picture for family viewing. They say that the tapes they have on hire range from Disney through to blockbusters. In fact, anything suitable for family viewing. And underneath, Brian, they have a selection of some of the videos that they're renting at that time.
Okay.
So I'll let you be the judge of whether you think these are suitable for family viewing. So the first one is Annie.
A horror. That's a horror film, isn't it?
The next one is Confessions of a Driving Instructor, the 1970s British sex comedy.
Wow.
Which I've looked up and is currently rated 18 for strong comic sex. We then have Cheech and Chong's Nice Dreams, which is a very, it's basically about them. I haven't watched it, but I understand it features a lot of content related to drugs. That's also currently rated as an 18. Then we have Mad Max 2.
Wow.
Do you think that's appropriate for a family audience?
Well, my family, yes. Your family, maybe no.
Well, that is rated 15 for strong violence and scenes of sexual violence. And the final film they're advertising is 10 to Midnight, starring Charles Bronson, which is also an 18.
Wow.
So some of these films are probably showing worse things that is in some of the video nasties.
Yeah, and there was a famous shop on the Belmont Road in Belfast, Family Viewing, which famously stocked only films of 15 certificate and under, so very much for family viewing. And I had a little look back at the news report when this shop opened, just to see what titles they had. You know, I'm just thinking this is just going to be Walt Disney animations and, you know, almost like a Christian bookshop. But they did have All the President's Men and The Empire Strikes Back, and they had a lot of Hollywood classics, Singing in the Rain. They had Faulty Towers. They had Top Cat.
Yeah.
You know, so I'm thinking, hey, this is pretty good. And the owner is asked what films would he not stock, and he said the latest Clint Eastwood, Sudden Impact, because of bad language. So it is so subjective, as we say. This kind of idea of family viewing is so subjective.
Yeah, it sounds like family viewing was sticking to their principles a bit more than Video World in Portadown. And the other thing that's really interesting, and you can watch the video of this, is that there is a sign on the outside imprinted on the glass that says no horror or pornographic videos. This is part of their selling point. People don't want to be associated with the video nasties anymore.
Well, Mary Whitehouse, as you say, stated that she didn't know what impact video nasties were going to have on people in the future. And if 8 out of 10 Belfast children were watching video nasties, well, Sam, we can discover what has happened to all of these people and what impact it has had. So if anyone listening to this watched video nasties when they were far too young, get in touch and let us know how things turned out. So Sam, I keep saying this at the end of every episode, but was that the end of video nasties?
Well, no. I mean, as you say, pirate copies still circulated of these films. I suppose it just forced them underground. And the moral panic that was there, so it shifts to other things after the passing of the Video Recordings Act. So later on in the 1980s, what you've euphemistically called blue movies seemed to become an issue in the press. They could previously be sold in video shops, but the Video Recordings Act introduced an R18 certificate, which meant that they could then only be sold in licensed sex shops. But again, there were lots of reports that illegal copies are being sold under the counter. In 1984, a spokesman for the industry said there's very little they could do about these illegal copies coming in. He cites them as coming from countries such as Denmark. So, Denmark is the root of all the problems. We don't want your Danish videos here in morally upstanding Northern Ireland.
There is something rotten in the state of Denmark.
And even by 1992, there's a report in the Sunday Life saying pornographic video is big business in Ulster, and it again complains about these imports coming from Europe and the large number of unclassified videos. Moral panic about videos never really goes away. It might shift to different types of content, but there's always this concern within Northern Ireland about the impact of videos and what they might be doing to people.
That is the end of our episode. In the next episode, we're going to press pause.
Thank you everyone for listening to Say Yes to VHS.
The music is by Score Draw.
The Wonder Cinema Video Shop
is now closed.